This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, begins the show discussing water rights and conservation easements, long-term care costs, tax home, negative easements, and assessing landlocked areas. Project consultant for the Kansas Agriculture Safety and Health Program at K-State, Tawnie Larson, keeps today's show moving as she explains why good sleep is important for people's health. Wrapping up the show is the Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, and Brian Lubbers as they talk through a listener question, trying to understand why a bull is prolapsing when he breeds. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show discussing topics in law and taxation when it comes to agriculture with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you again, Shelby.
Roger, a handful of topics to talk through today, and the first one involving water rights and conservation easements. And how do water rights and conservation easements go together?
Well, it's a big deal, particularly if you grant a permanent conservation easement on land that you then donate to, say, a land trust or other qualified charity. And that's particularly a big issue in Kansas and points west, where we get into the more arid parts of the country. Because, Shelby, to get at the tax deduction, which is what people that do this are largely concerned about, and some of these tax deductions, the charitable deduction is going to be multi-millions of dollars. There are lots of these court cases that are out there, and IRS doesn't like the concept. That's why we see all these court cases. So we have to make sure that it's done absolutely correctly, and the easement has to be a perpetual easement. So there can't be anything that would cause the perpetual nature of the easement to be extinguished. Now, of course, the government can take the property, and that can extinguish the easement, but there's another procedure that we go through in terms of how the condemnation proceeds are dispersed between the parties to make it still deemed to be perpetual in the eyes of the government. But when it comes down to water rights, if the water rights are essential to the conservation purpose of the easement, then those water rights have to be protected, or you violate the perpetual nature of the easement and you're going to lose your tax deduction.
So when it comes to this, really important to talk with the professional and make sure it's done correctly?
That's absolutely critical. Not only does the deed granting the easement have to be drafted properly to account for those water rights and the usage of those water rights, you have to determine what's necessary to enforce those rights and make sure that the use of the rights is restricted consistent with the easement's conservation purpose. So they're going to have to be maintained, they're going to have to be used and not abandoned, because if they're not enforced, then you could lose the charitable deduction that you claim for donating the easement. The IRS could come back on you and make you pay back what you benefited from in terms of the tax deduction by granting that easement. So pay attention to water rights real closely if there's a donation of land to a land trust where you're putting a permanent conservation easement on there and there are underlying water rights.
Another thing that people really need to pay attention to and maybe need to take into consideration when it comes to planning long-term care, and what are a few things and factors that people should consider?
Well, that's a big issue for some people, and long-term care is not just an elder law issue. Sometimes you can have accidents, certain types of physical problems that younger people would encounter, and then they would need long-term care in a facility. And so incorporating long-term care concerns into an estate plan is a big deal. And how do you address that? Well, I think some of the things that people need to examine when they look at covering long-term care costs, of course, would be long-term care insurance. And when they do that, one of the ways to evaluate the policies would be the duration of benefits and what's covered under the policy. Policies cover generally from 1 to 5 years of long-term care. And you also want to understand what triggers payment under the policy and what are the terms and conditions that are attached to those triggers. So you got to make sure that you understand those things. And if there's a waiting period, there may be a waiting period before benefits kick in once the individual is receiving institutionalized care, anywhere from a few days to a year. Now, the longer that waiting period for benefits to pay out, then the lower the policy premiums are going to be. So you have to weigh that. Now, most people, the data indicate once they get into a nursing home, for example, they don't live more than 6 months. But that's just an average. And so there are many instances where people have been in there for well over a decade or two, but there have been many instances, far more instances, where it's less than 6 months. But on average, the actuaries know when they write the policies that the average length of stay is about 6 months. So you got to weigh that economic cost when you are evaluating policies, and then also determine what the policy pays. Will it pay all of the daily long-term care costs or just a percentage? Maybe you can get a policy tailored to pay only the portion of cost that your income doesn't. But you want to try to protect your assets so that you may not have to gift assets to protect them. And I would add this. Make sure you've got an inflation adjuster in that policy. And we've seen that really hurt some people over the past 3 years or so with inflation substantial in the economy. And make sure that you understand the type of inflation adjuster that is in the policy.
And another thing really important to understand, but can be a little confusing when we talked about it earlier, tax homes. And Roger, what is a tax home?
Well, this issue comes up, and it is confusing, the way the IRS has written the rules. But if you travel on business, but you're not away from your home, you can't deduct your travel expenses. Those are personal, non-deductible expenses. So you have to be away from your home to be able to deduct those expenses when you're on business. So then that really brings up, what does home mean? Well, the IRS says that home is defined by being in the vicinity of your work. So what that means is if you choose to live a great distance away from your business for personal reasons, then the travel between the personal residence and the place of business is not business related, and you can't deduct the cost. So if you don't relocate soon after you're hired to work at a place of business that is far from your residence, you can't deduct the travel expense to and from that new place of business. Now, if you're hired for an indefinite assignment, then your tax home likely switches to the new place of business soon after the date you're hired. If you don't have a regular place of business and you move from area to area for jobs, then the IRS says you can't be away from home because you don't have a tax home from which to be away from. And so you can't deduct travel-related expenses in that instance. So these tax home rules, you've got to follow them closely. You have to be aware of them, get good tax advice on these so that you know when you can deduct your business-related expenses when you are away from home. And this sometimes trips up farmers and ranchers that have non-farm jobs after harvest and before planting season, kind of in the off-season for farming. A lot of them will have off-farm jobs, and you got to be aware of these tax home rules.
And all these topics are in one of your recent blog articles, and another topic in that article involving negative easements of light, air, and view. And what are negative easements when it comes to those factors?
Well, a negative easement is the same thing as a restrictive covenant on land, and it restricts you from doing certain things on your property. And some examples would be riparian rights or lateral and subjacent support rights, and the right to be free from a nuisance. And that's one of the big ones in the ag setting is I have a right to be free, to be able to use and enjoy my property in any manner I want, so long as it doesn't interfere with your right to use and enjoy your property how you see fit. So I kind of have a negative easement over you, you have a negative easement over me. But most courts will refuse to recognize a negative easement for light, air, and view unless the whatever is placed on the property is done with malice. So let's say you and I, Shelby, are adjoining landowners, and I don't like the look of some structure you put on your property. So I erect a very high fence, and I put obnoxious things on the other side of that fence. And it just irritates you. Well, it's obstructed perhaps the air, it's obstructed perhaps the light getting into your home or whatever the case might be, or your animal livestock facility, and then you just can't stand looking at it. So it's obstructed your light, your air, your view, you're upset, and the court says, well, you don't have a negative easement for unobstructed airflow or for the light to come through or things that I painted on the fence, for example, unless you can prove that I did it with malice. And that's the one exception. And you might be able to do that in that situation that I was describing.
And another thing that involves dealing with your neighbors sometimes, accessing landlocked parcels, and how sometimes do property end up in landlocked areas?
Well, it often happens when a portion of a tract is sold off, and then you get a landlocked parcel. Let's say that I've got an 80 and the front of the 80 is road. I've got road frontage and road access there. I sell the back 40 to you, and it's an interior tract in the section, and so there are no other roads around that except that frontage road. But now you got the back 40, and I'm not going to let you get access to get there. And you got that landlocked parcel, and I said, well, too bad, so sad. You can't. I'm not going to allow you to come across my property to get to your 40-acre field back there. Well, the law will imply the existence of an easement in that situation, and so the law will impose an easement on my front 40 for you to get access to your back 40. And if I don't grant that to you without the court ordering it, the court may not put it where I'd like it to be. So in these situations, what we always suggest is to the party that's going to be subjected to an easement if it gets into litigation is, why don't you negotiate one with that other party, receive compensation for it, and get it placed where you want, maybe along a fence line, someplace out of the way, but receive some compensation for it, and describe the type of usage that is allowed on that easement, the types of vehicles that go in there, types of equipment, the width of equipment, the size of equipment, those types of things. Just try to negotiate those things by contract to put it in a written easement that will get recorded on the land records. Otherwise, the law is going to impose one on me in that situation so you can get access.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link his blog article titled More Legal and Tax Issues for Farmers and Ranchers in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can find it for yourself by going to AgManager.info. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about the importance of good sleep with project consultant for the Kansas Agriculture Safety and Health Program at K-State, Tawnie Larson. Tawnie, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Shelby. It's great to be here.
Tawnie, what is the value and importance of good sleep?
I would think the number one importance of good sleep is that we will live longer lives, more active lives. It helps us decrease our stress levels and how we deal with stress. And I think we're usually in a better mood and higher energy level if we get good sleep.
Are there health concerns that good sleep could also help lower?
Absolutely. So lack of sleep can actually lead to obesity and risk for many other health problems such as diabetes and heart health and heart disease. And so the other important thing about getting enough sleep is it helps us detoxify our bodies. When we're resting, a lot of work is going on in our bodies. And so it helps repair our muscles. If you worked hard that day, a lot of times that's the recovery period for your muscles to grow and get stronger. And also without adequate sleep, we can sometimes make poor decisions.
Is there also a problem-solving aspect to getting a good amount of sleep?
There is. So for adults, the average recommended hours of sleep is 7 hours per night. And also, if you go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time, that is shown through studies that it is more effective and we get the most out of our sleep.
Tawnie, you mentioned for adults need 7 or more hours of sleep, but what about for the adolescents or younger people in those families?
So studies have shown that adolescents do need 9 to 10 hours of sleep a night, and it actually goes up the younger they are. So, they need to rest too. Their bodies are growing just as much as they're healing and everything else. So keep that in mind when they're tired, cranky maybe, but it's like sleep is very restorative for all ages.
And so when it comes to problem solving and having all those cognitive abilities improve, when there is enough sleep, why is that something that's also really important when we think about farm safety?
So sleep gives us that restorative feature of our everyday lives, but also it helps us with our cognitive ability, like you said, and helps us solve problems. And so I think if you solve a problem when you're tired, you may not have the best result. Maybe it's not the right solution. But if you get a good night's sleep, then studies have shown that you just have better problem-solving skills. And you're also physically in better condition. You're not as clumsy. And so that may avoid some accidents or injury on the farm.
So maybe a little bit of truth to the saying, just sleep on it?
Yes, exactly.
Is there also then some concerns, maybe extra concern when we think about getting enough sleep for younger people who are on the farm?
Yeah, so studies have shown that adolescents in the farm environment are 2 to 3 times more likely to be injured if they're sleep deprived. So think about your teenagers and getting them up early to go out and do chores and help, and they're tired. So maybe letting them sleep a little bit longer.
We're aware that sometimes there's seasons of agriculture that just sometimes don't seem to allow for as much sleep. But what are some things that can happen when you don't get enough sleep?
So when you don't get enough sleep, there's actually the disease that we talked about. There's also studies have shown that if someone goes without sleep for 21 hours or more, it actually has the same effect as being intoxicated. And you can have a blood alcohol content of 0.08, and that's the intoxication level. And so just think about that. If you have, a 0.08 and you're out running your farming equipment or you're trying to plan for something, it's probably not the most effective time to do that.
Sometimes it's worth sleeping a little bit longer before getting back to the tractor the next day.
Right. So don't go climbing the tractor if you didn't sleep the night before.
According to statistics, how does sleepiness factor into, unfortunately, fatal accidents?
Sleepiness accounts for the highest number of fatal single-car run-off-the-road accidents. And with up to 6,000 fatal crashes each year that may be caused by drowsy drivers. So if we think about that and relate it back to what we do on the farm and on rural highways, if someone is sleepy and you encounter them and you're driving a combine or a tractor down the road, that could be a recipe for something bad to happen. So we don't want to be on that side of it, but we do need to be very aware of other drivers on the road, perhaps even early in the day where people maybe didn't get enough sleep, but they had to get up and get moving, or even later in the day when people are returning home from work and they're tired and they get a little drowsy driving that 2-lane road. So be aware. And we always talk about tractor drivers and equipment drivers on highways need to be aware of the other vehicles around them. So not just when you're passing or turning or that type of thing, but pretty much all the time to just be aware of what the cars around you are doing.
What are some reasons that people might not be able to get as good a sleep at night?
So there are medical conditions that may lead to that. Insomnia is one. We've all probably heard of that. Sleep apnea is also a big part of that, and that's obstructive sleep. So that is usually your throat or your tongue or something constricts, and so you're not able to get really good sleep and good breathing. And there are machines that help with that. We probably have all heard of those. Also, excessive sleepiness. That is also a disorder. Narcolepsy, if you fall asleep often during the day. And also like restless leg syndrome, which involves the urge to like move your legs and sensations that you've got like creepy crawlies, tingling, burning, or itching. And so if you have anything related to those kind of disorders that we just talked about, I would recommend you see your doctor. There are medications, there's herbal supplements, oils, and all that. I'm not an expert in those, but I have heard that they really help.
What are some tips you have for anybody, specifically farmers and ranchers today, though, on getting good sleep?
So the room temperature is really important. You want it to be cool. And so 60 to 68 degrees promotes the most restorative sleep that you can get. Getting into a habit or a routine of start dimming the lights when the sun sets. Shut down the blue lights, the phones, tablets, televisions. Maybe don't leave the TV on all night. And then getting up the same time, like we talked about, and going to bed at the same time. And getting sunlight during the day while you're out between like 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., getting up and, it's so refreshing. And Kansas is so beautiful. It'd be so great to just be able to spend a few minutes outside before you just go into the shop and start working. And eating well and taking care of yourself and your whole body also promotes good sleep. We talk about whole body health a lot, and sleep is a really important part of that. And that's your restorative time. And also limiting caffeine intake in the mornings. And that might not be the popular vote, but it does show in studies that makes a difference of how much caffeine you drink related to the amount of sleep that you're going to get.
Is it also maybe important to make sure that caffeine is staying not towards bedtime?
Exactly. So if you can limit your caffeine intake to the morning time, then you'll probably have better sleep.
Tawnie, what are those overall big points that you'd like to remind our listeners of when it comes to the importance of getting good sleep?
Well, as we talked about, it's very important for your body to heal and also so that you're as sharp as you can possibly be throughout the day. And we all have priorities. And so we need to just think about sleep as an important priority, important just like eating healthy and exercising. And we all understand that, your home needs manage, your kids, it's a full-time job plus some, but just try and make sure that you include good sleep as a priority.
Tawnie, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. I appreciate talking about sleep.
That was project consultant for the Kansas Agriculture Safety and Health Program at K-State, Tawnie Larson, discussing why it is important to get an adequate amount of sleep. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Kansas Livestock Association's Scarlett Maydinger as she explains a new checkoff-funded campaign that is using real people and their real stories to highlight how beef brings people together.
To share how beef is part of memorable moments, NCBA, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff, created the Real People, Real Stories video series. An extension of the Together We Bring More campaign, this new series promotes the Beef It's What's for Dinner brand. The videos demonstrate how people from across the country celebrate their traditions and the important role beef plays in their gatherings. The new series specifically documents authentic moments of people from every walk of life who come together and celebrate their bond the same way, over a delicious beef meal. Each story also includes an accompanying beef recipe featuring different cuts and flavors. NCBA Senior Executive Director of Brand Marketing, Sarah Reese, said she thinks the series helps consumers connect with the Beef It's What's for Dinner brand in a different way. Based on market research and focus groups, consumers value how beef connects them with others. Reese said beef builds relationships, and this project helps celebrate that aspect. The series, which includes 3 videos thus far, is available on YouTube and is being shared on beefitswhatsfordinner.com, social media, and through connected TV. To date, the videos have generated 4.8 million impressions and have been viewed 3.2 million times. This storytelling series will continue with several new videos coming in 2025. I'm Scarlett Maydinger.
If you'd like to find out more information from the Kansas Livestock Association, you can do so by going to KLA.org. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we end our Wednesday show with part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, Phillip Lancaster, and Brian Lubbers as they answer a listener question.
It's a listener that actually sells bulls, and he had a customer call this morning that said a bull he bought was prolapsing when he mounts a cow to breed. So it's a rectal prolapse that comes out when he mounts a cow to breed. Bob, I'm going to ask you, normal or abnormal?
That is not typical, not normal.
Okay, abnormal.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with abnormal, too.
Abnormal. Phillip, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's abnormal.
Okay. Now, to the meat of this, what do you think is causing that, or what causes rectal prolapses in bulls?
It's actually another really good question because, I deal with these types of problems once in a while, and they can be kind of frustrating to figure out. Basically, it could be too much fat in the pelvic cavity. It could be something that's irritating, the colon, the back part of the intestine, such as, we talk about coccidiosis, we talk about other inflammatory problems. And so you'd basically want to kind of start investigating the problem. The other one that can happen is high estrogen feeds. So some of the feedstuffs that might have high estrogens would include things like clover or alfalfa, sometimes even soybean products. And so those are the types of things I would investigate. There's no smoking gun from this history of what is causing this, and I would have to start asking, what's the bull being fed, and those types of things.
What about a genetic component? Is there any work that would say there's any genetic relationship with this?
I'm honestly not sure. There is a genetic component with some of the vaginal prolapses, just, kind of the structure of the musculature back there around the anus and around that area. And so it wouldn't surprise me that there could be, and a lot of times we're talking about genetic environment interactions, and, so that under certain circumstances, some animals may be more at risk. There's even some couple of, if you had a disease process going on in the back part of the large intestine, there's some lymphocytic diseases, there's some other types of diseases that could cause that. So it's not clear why this bull is doing this. It's not typical. It's not normal. And I would start with the feedstuffs and then move on to some other things depending on what my answers were.
A lot of things associated with our word of the day, which is tenesmus, right?
Well, that's a great word.
It's a great word of the day. If you can use it in a sentence today, you get bonus points. Tenesmus is straining.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that straining can be associated with large intestinal diseases. And it can cause the prolapse. And a lot of our rectal prolapses, bulls or other species, could be related to that.
Yeah, and you notice that the producer said when he mounts, and during the act of mounting, you get some abdominal pressure, basically, and that's why it's associated with the mounting is that causes some abdominal pressure. So if there's some irritation or something not holding the rectum in well, that's why we see it at that time.
So if he's not prolapsing when he's defecating, does that give you an indication that it's something different than? Or some differential then between what's going on?
No, interestingly, no. And I see where you're coming from, but that's not necessarily when they prolapse.
Yeah, and again, my recommendation would be have a veterinarian take a look at this bull because, Bob's talked about all the kind of etiology, pathology. It sounds like it's an intra-abdominal pressure issue. It doesn't sound like it's a straining issue. Defecation issue. So I would think about things like, I'll say, space occupying masses. So does he have a tumor or something else happening that when he mounts, the pressure is enough that now he's got more pressure than he should? And the question about genetics, I'm not aware of anything either that shows that, but we say that. So I would think about, but I think this is probably a candidate for just a good physical exam to start with.
Absolutely. So the fix for this or the treatment for this will depend on which of those conditions is affecting this bull. Good physical exam to start with, maybe some follow-up testing. The thing you would get concerned about with rectal prolapse of any type is if it comes out and stays out, then you need a more immediate fix and workup, but that doesn't treat the underlying condition, which is likely associated with tenesmus.
That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.